When was the first, manly moment? I was about 14. It was winter in England and as usual, it was raining. Something we're all used to. I had to go out into the garden to put a few things away in the shed and it was already pitch black outside. We had a fairly big garden. The shed was on the far side and we had a little path down the side of the house with a gate that led to the driveway. It was really windy and the gauge and shed door were both flapping in the wind and making loads of noise. Street lights were positioned so there was just enough light in the garden to let you kinda see, but not enough for you really identify something. I always found it kinda creeps. So I throw a few things in the shed and lock it up. As I start walking back inside, that's when it happens. The gate to the driveway swings open with a gust of wind and crashes around its hinges. Then something comes sprinting down the path towards me. It was about the size of Labrador. It kept low to the ground and moved so quickly toward me while letting out this growl, snarl. It all happened so quickly. I let out the manliest scream I could. Ran towards it and with all my might I kicked it like my life depended on it. Our recycling box was never the same. My foot went straight through it. Turns out the wind had caught it and blown it down the path. The growling was actually just the sound of plastic on pavement. People laugh when I tell them that story, but to me, that was my first manly moment. Something attacked me in the dark. I could have ran. I could have cowered. I could have froze. But I didn't. I let out a war cry and kicked the shit out of that recycling bin. Edit. Wow, this really blew up. Glad everyone liked my story. My father told me I'll never be a real man until I replace my first engine by myself. I lease my vehicles. I was around 11 years old and my parents ordered a pizza with toppings that my older sister, 4 years my senior, was refusing to eat. My dad had a habit of physically abusing us on a regular basis and didn't appreciate my sister's refusal to eat mushrooms on her pizza. He picks up her plate and smashes the hot pizza in her face and in the process knocks her to the floor. Normally I'd be scared and freeze up, but instead I got up and yelled at him to get off of her and punched him in the balls. When he leaned over I started Donkey Kong punching him in the head. My sister got up and started punching him too. He was leaning over covering his head while we were punching him until our mom stopped us. The whole thing had to have only taken a few seconds, but after that the physical abuse almost stopped entirely. Woke up in the middle of the night and saw somebody crouched right next to my bed with long, curly, black hair like Charles II. I was instantly wide awake and knew I had to sort this out fast. I punched with all my strength and was rewarded with a shooting pain all the way from my knuckles, right up my arm as I connected with the hard plastic arm of my desk chair. A carload of guys gate crashed a 21st party at a bowls club in the country and started beating up a guy the first knew loosely from the group of friends from the party because he told them to get out, they weren't invited. I am from the western suburbs in Melbourne and not from this country town, but the gatecrashers were known shitbags from the area. When they started getting aggressive with the guy, shoving him and doing the "what you gonna do about it" bullshit, everyone started clearing out and left him on his own. I thought I was probably gonna get my ass kicked, but at least it wouldn't be this guy on his own, so I solo ran in and hip and shouldered the two blokes wailing on him and sent them flying. Not knowing what I should do next, I put on my most crazed lunatic "come on you cunts, I'll eat your fucking souls" barrage of taunts as I stood wide-eyed, arms out and fists clenched. I was completely bluffing as I was sure I would get my ass beat and clearly outnumbered. I had no plan, but all I could do was double down on my dumb shit decision and hope someone would save me once I start getting bashed, but it worked. They backed away to their car and started shouting threats as they drove off. The guy that got beat was a bit bloody but could have been a whole lot worse and was singing my praises as his savior the rest of the night. Felt like an absolute badass and never realized I had the power to intimidate like that, and just made my balls feel 10 kilos heavier for a good week. Just turned 18. My mum's ex-husband was abusive. I punched him twice. His arm fell through the window. Doctor said he's lucky to have feeling in his arm as it was so full of glass. He moved out a week later. Mum's happy now. Edit. He himself didn't go through the window, just his whole right arm. I was 15 years old and mountain biking in Gatineau Park in Quebec with my dad and a friend of his. I was about a half-mile ahead of them on a downhill part of the trail when I came flying around a bend and a black bear and its cub were standing right in the middle of the trail. I jumped off my bike, tumbled hard towards them and froze looking up at this bear which had retreated a few feet while its cub climbed a small tree about 15 feet away. I laid as still as I could watching the bear's feet when I noticed it started walking towards me making grunting noises. It was about 10 feet away from close enough I could smell it. I remembered that you had to project strength, so I scooped up a handful of gravels and dirt and jumped up screaming as loud as I could while throwing the rocks and debris as hard as I could at the bear. It literally stumbled backwards and burst through a bush where it stopped at the bottom of the tree its cub was in. So I just keep screaming at it, very vulgar threats while waving my arms. Then I started slowly backing up still screaming and grabbed a fallen branch. The bear started walking towards me again, so I run a couple steps screaming even louder waving the stick. This time the bear backed away again and its cub climbed down, so I did it again and they turned and booked it off into the woods. About 30 seconds later my dad arrives and asks what's wrong cause he heard the screaming. I turned to him and, still screaming, yelled bear. And pointed in the woods where about 50 feet away you could see the mother bear on her hind legs looking at us. We all screamed at it this time and it took off for good. Afterwards the adrenaline wore off and I was shaking like a leaf. Stayed between my dad and neighbor for the rest of 18 miles we had left that day. Probably the scariest moment of my life, and I realize how lucky I am. BC mother bears are likely to attack. I think the fact that I came around the bend so fast and unexpectedly and projectile fired my bike towards it that it spooked it enough to not immediately attack me. People tell me it was pretty manly, but at the time I felt absolutely horrified and had a fear of bears for a long time afterwards. TL. Dr. I yelled and screamed insults at a mama black bear with a cub and scared it away after almost slamming into them while mountain biking. Sounds lame, but I moved away from my hometown when I was a kid. I get to my high school years and the girl that was my neighbor down there finds me on social media, we start talking etc. I go to prom with her. Her ex calls me a hillbilly because I moved to a different place. I was fine with that, then he starts imitating a dog bark at her and calls her a bitch. We stepped outside, I hand her my jacket, just like the movies, and had it out in the parking lot. I did win. And later that night got me some. I honestly felt king of the world that night. Wasn't me but a mate who had a similar story to you. Him and his brother bought their first house together. Brother 1 worked at a medicinal warehouse where they were throwing away a mannequin. He took it home and set it up in the back living room. We went out to a nightclub. Brother 2, who had been out all day, had no knowledge of the said mannequin. As he was walking past the window late at night, he saw a figure in the room, basically did commando rolls, opened up the door and charged at and punched the mannequin with all his might and almost busted his hand. I was 14 and I was walking up my street on my home from school. It was a nice sunny day, in the middle of May I'm pretty sure. I was only a couple of houses away from mine and I saw a huge dog. Probably about half the height of me. It belonged to the new neighbors and it looked up from its bowl when it smelt me. I thought at first it wanted to be friends, then it started growling and barking. It started to chase me, I thought it might ear me. I ran as fast as possible but only had a 1-second lead, not enough time to unlock the door and get inside before his hellhound would eat me. I had to act quick. I turned around, stood as tall as I could and then, woof, I barked as loud as possible at the dog. Obviously it was traumatized by my display of manliness and ran home. Since then I haven't seen the dog. Guess I'm top dog now. Man, imagine the roles reverse. You're chasing something that doesn't make human sounds, and it whips around yelling banana at you. Then you piss yourself running thinking oh shit it can talk. When I was 18 I stopped my friend from getting raped, her female by a male. I literal lifted him up and smashed his jaw against a curb. His jaw broken, most of his teeth gone. It was little too much I think, but he already pulled her pants and had his dick out so it was last second safe. I think I grew up that day. Don't know for sure cause I still act like an idiot sometimes. I was 30. Doom was the game for PC back then. We were living at Gama's helping take care of Phil. I had been playing a few hours before bed. At about 3 a.m. I heard a scuffle and looked up to see the monster from Doom hovering over my wife. I leapt out of the bed and threw a flying crane kick at the monster's head. A scream ensued, my own, as my foot connected with the creature that turned out to be my tallboy dresser. Broke foot. Screaming pain woke the entire house. Hospital 12 weeks of boot. And a lifetime of Granny giving me shit about it every once in a while. When I took my younger brother's advice. He's a smart guy and I was always too stubborn or full of myself to hear him out. When I did for the first time I realized what a stupid boy I was, and that was a big, light switch, change my point of view on everything moment.